Let me turn to another learning activity example that I've asked you to take a look at, the Olympic site selection. And I'll say these learning activities are not all designed to be great cases. They're designed to be examples that can be improved. So as you look at Olympic site selection, let's start to code that, and maybe Tracy, could you come in and describe what this project is, and then we'll bring in Silvana to talk about how it might be coded on the collaboration rubric?
I'll do my best.
Great.
So the lesson on the Olympic site selection is really a group of students who have been given a job to make a recommendation to the Olympic Committee about where to host the next Olympics. And they need to do that in a variety of ways, utilizing a variety of resources and taking into consideration a variety of things. And the result is that they are actually going to write a letter of recommendation to the site selection committee.
That's right. That's right. So in terms of collaboration, what are the critical pieces of this?
Well, that each student has a role to play. Mm-hmm. So they definitely were asked to work together. That's clear. They definitely could not do this on their own.
Great, great. Let me turn it over now to Silvana. Sorry for interrupting there, Tracy, but
no, it's good. Let's spread the wealth around.
There we go. There we go. Silvana, are you able to join the call right now?
Yes, I am.
Super.
Hi, everyone. Well, in my opinion, this activity calls for collaboration and could be coded as between a 4 and a 5 because, well, students are assigned different roles and there is interdependency in relation to their work because it depends on the research that each of them does that they will be able to make the final product later on because they have different roles. They stand on somebody's shoes as geologists, seismologists, they study volcanology, and it depends on the research each of them does that with the conclusions they can write a letter later. So they have to make an important decision together, and it is not an individual piece of work that will be put together as one part after the other. The conclusion of their individual work will be a joint product. So for me there is interdependency. They work individually and later they work together and there is a common product. So for me it could be coded between 4 and 5.
Thank you. Thank you. That's an excellent, excellent description of how the thinking process about this learning activity can really be informed by considering the rubrics. And, you know, I think it's probably right that this is a 5, that they have shared responsibility for the work product. They have to make substantive decisions together about which city to recommend, and then that they each had a specific and different role in investigating and putting that recommendation together. So this would be a 5. And the key, one thing to recognize is that these rubrics are to support teachers in thinking through how they're designing learning activities. It's not necessarily to evaluate a lesson it's really to be used as a support for teachers as they think through the learning design process. And we've talked about this already, but this is an important thing. How could learning activities be redesigned when you're running this as a professional development? We usually, when we run one of these professional developments, the 21st Century Learning Design, it usually takes 2 to 3 days, sometimes longer. So you spend 2 or 3 hours on each rubric and discussing learning activity examples and really going into a lot of depth on thinking through how to redesign learning activities. And we really strongly recommend that when you run these types of professional development with teachers, you ask them to bring their own example learning activities with them and think about redesigning them as they work through understanding the rubrics. So let's turn to the use of ICT for learning as another rubric, an important one because it's so important to our lives today. And a great question to ask, as this is presented to teachers, is asking them how they are using technology in their teaching and whether they're using it in ways, as we talked about before, that really you layer technology on top of traditional teaching practices. Are they using it to show content and information, to deliver information, or are they really asking students to use technology in ways that develop student skills around knowledge creation? So the rubric for 21st Century Learning Design is really looking at how teachers are asking students to use the technology. And what we see is sorry, I'm getting behind on a slide here. This rubric really looks at whether or not students have the opportunity to use technology, and then whether or not the use of technology, students' use of it, is really in the name of knowledge construction. Are they using technology to simply represent information, or knowledge construction is the idea of applying what is learned to a new context through analyzing, through creating new ideas, synthesizing ideas, etc. So whether technology is used just to receive content or whether it's used to produce something new is the critical decision point here between whether technology used for learning is a 2 or a 3. And then you have to ask whether technology is required for constructing this knowledge. Can the knowledge construction be done without technology? Could students gather information from books in the library? Could they produce a presentation on paper that would do the same thing as what they've done through a PowerPoint? And this is a hard thing to design into a learning activity that really takes advantage of the potential for technology to be used in knowledge construction. And to get to the very highest levels, and we've seen very rare examples of this in learning activities that we've looked at around the world, are students asked to produce an ICT product, like a blog or a simulation or something that can't be produced without technology. And is that product designed for a specific audience? So in the real world, when you're designing a knowledge-based product, it's always for a specific audience, for a customer, for a group of people. So students just producing a blog for their own classroom would not qualify as a 5. But if students are asked to produce something with a specific audience in mind, that's when they have to think about the knowledge construction and the design of their product in a much deeper, richer way. So with that explanation of the rubric, a high-level overview, let's turn to coding the Olympic site selection example on the use of ICT for learning. So we've already talked a little bit about this Olympic site selection learning activity example. So think about what this would be coded on the use of ICT for learning example. And I'm going to ask Delana to come in and talk a little bit about what your thoughts are on this example.
So I was reading through this, and it kind of surprised me because as I read through it, I'm not so sure that you really need to use ICT to gather the data and information for it. It seems to me that you can gather local information from magazines and newspapers and other items that you might find in a library, from books, you know, doing research and things like that. So I actually scored this down out of 2.
Interesting. Good. Any other thoughts? Tracy, you want to chime in on what you think this is coded at?
Well, so that's pretty interesting, Delana, because that was initially my thought as well. However, when I really looked at the words that were used to describe how the teacher was structuring the learning activity and what specifically they wanted the students to do, it was very specific about getting up-to-date environmental data. And I think that, you know, at least in my experience, you know, up-to-date data would be really difficult to get from, you know, kind of traditional sources, library or print sources. And so I actually thought it was a 4 because of that, because I didn't feel like they could accomplish it without ICT. But because the final product didn't necessarily have to be ICT-based, it wasn't ICT-based, I wouldn't score it as a 5. So 4 is my vote.
Thanks to you both. Interesting thinking there. And we're seeing a lot of debate on Olympic site selection and the coding score among sort of the voters in the poll, of participants on the call. So I want to give you a chance to think through this. A lot of people are voting a 2 on this, on use of ICT for learning. We've got about 20 to say it's a 2, so that would say yes, ICT is required. They're asked to look up information on the internet, but is it used for knowledge construction? And that's the key shift between a 2 and a 3. Is the way technology is incorporated into this project asking students to use it for knowledge construction efforts? So Delana and Tracy, can you perhaps discuss that?
Delana, go ahead. You want to take it?
Well, for me,
I'm trying to read the directions really carefully here, and I noticed the second bullet, it really asserts to make sure that current environmental trends are taken into account. And so I think, I mean, if they mean like really current environmental trends, the most current information we can find, then it would seem to me that you probably would need some internet access to find the most current information. Tracy, what do you think?
Also, I think that because they're being asked to take that information and then make a recommendation, right? So they're taking original data, original sources, and then putting it into a different context, which is, you know, making a recommendation. Then that's why I think that it makes that leap, because that is knowledge construction.
Great. And then somebody else, go ahead and chime in. Is it Savannah?
well, for me, it is a 3 because, well, although they could have used other sources to do the research, I think that the internet today is the most frequently used tool for students to do research, even for people when they are at work and in real life, they usually use ICT to do research. Besides, the next step they use ICT in the project is to write or to type their letter of recommendation to the Olympic Committee. And well, that is also a real use of ICT in my opinion, because nobody these days would use a pen and a piece of paper to write a letter of recommendation. So I think it's a real life use of technologies.
Interesting, interesting. And you see how the discussion and different ideas about this learning activity give you thoughts about how it could be clearer, how the different ways of designing the learning activity can foster collaboration in different ways and foster use of technology in different ways. It could be a much richer technology-based project, but it certainly is asking students to use technology to gather data and to analyze data about the environmental conditions of the city. So in that respect, it's 3, and then they do that without technology. And that's simple, I think. But I think many of you on the call are right that it's probably required to get this kind of up-to-date information today. And I have an interesting thing to add, somewhat related to this. I was at a meeting in London last week, and a representative of the actual Olympic Committee came and saw this. I was talking about 21st century learning design, and they were very interested because they're building out a learning website for the next Olympics and really wanted to consider using this as part of it. So we'll see if that moves forward. But an interesting side connection to the Olympics example.